Hey there, it's me again. How to get a 4-year degree in only 7 years. This is not a DIY, do what I did message here. This is not a how-to video. This is really the story of perseverance and hanging in there in order to achieve a goal. Something that, I was the first in my family to go to college. And it was hard. It was a long road for me, but I managed to make it through. So this is more of a story about perseverance, and hopefully a story that someone can relate to who might be having a hard time making it toward a goal, right? Maybe have, gotten things started and then fallen off and then started again. So I hope that by sharing this story of mine, it helps someone out there at least push on and forge forward through what they might be doing. So a little bit of background. I am the seventh out of 8 kids in my family. I am the first one to go to college in the family. And when we were growing up, the culture was really you went to high school, you got through high school, and then you got a job, maybe an apartment, and that's how things went. If you got a job at, with the transit department, the MBTA, or the gas company, or the city, or the state, somewhere where you can get a pension, you were set for life, right? You put in your 30 years or whatever, you get your pension, and you start your living. Well, I went to Boston Latin High School, and while I was there, a lot of my classmates were talking about college, right? And I had no concept of what college was, other than what I've seen on television, and really had no expectations of going to college. So once again, my mindset was high school was something you just had to get through. It wasn't a pathway to college or whatnot. It was just something to get through. So my first few years, I'm getting through. It wasn't until I think Thanksgiving break of my senior year in high school where my mother said to me, if you want to go to college, if you want to apply to some colleges, we'd be willing to pay the tuition. And I was like, oh, okay. Now, most people had already been accepted. I mean, from Latin school, you had like 50 kids going to Ivy League schools, right? Probably 10 to 15, maybe even 20 going to Harvard. And so I was like, okay, let's, start to think about some schools. And there was UMass Boston. And then a friend of mine said, hey, I'm applying to Framingham State. Why don't you apply to Framingham State? Okay, sure, I'll apply to Framingham State. So I got into Framingham State, and I did some kind of fill in the bubbles, and it said you should take economics as a major. So I thought I wanted to be in some sort of business. Once again, no experience, no big brother to tell me, hey, you should take this or you should take that. So I said, okay, I will be an economics major, and here we go. So that classmate of mine, we were roommates. So we got there, my parents drove me up, we unloaded everything, got into the dormitory, and this friend of mine was my classmate. Well, at the end of the first week, he went home for the weekend and never came back. So it was interesting. I ended up with another roommate who I really liked. He was a great kid. But here's the guy who sort of talked me into going here, and then it ends up that he left in any case. So here I am, year 1 of college. I've got no clue what to expect. I met up with a bunch of other guys, and to be honest with you, we sort of just had a good time that first year. We could use the gym, I think, from 9 p.m. until 11 p.m. So almost every night, rather than being in the room doing homework, we're going to the gym. So at the gym, 9 to 11, then you get back to your room, and then it's 11 o'clock, 11:30, and then you're watching Hawaii Five-0, the original, with Bookham Dano, the original. And then, the next thing you know, you don't want to get up for classes, and then you start to miss a couple. once you miss a couple, you're like, I don't really want to go back for the next one, and so forth. And the first year, ended up having a good time. The other thing with economics is I understood it, but I didn't get it, if you know what I mean. So one of the examples they use is guns and butter. If you only have guns and butter, and where do you put your money? And the other one is supply and demand. And they always kept throwing in this thing, all other things being constant. Well, all other things are never constant. So the thing was, it was so hypothetical to me that I had no way to apply it. I mean, I didn't at the time have a credit card, I probably had a checking account, but didn't really understand like what's all this economics about. Anyway, so the first year, let's call it a learning experience. When I finished my first year, my GPA was 0.05, which is about as low as you can go. I don't think you can get a 0.01. So anyway, no big surprise. The college sends me a letter, academic suspension, don't bother coming back next year. My parents were not thrilled at all because they had just spent, however much money it was. It wasn't a whole lot now, but it was a whole lot then because, it was different then. In any case, so that's year one. Year two, I'm suspended, right? So I can't go to school. So I'm hanging around in the town, hanging around with my buddies and whatnot. And this was the year when one of my good friends was killed. So there was this kid, I'm not gonna mention his name, but for the previous summer, I forget exactly how I met him from, in the town, with another friend and whatnot. And we ended up being, pretty good buddies. I went away on vacation in the summer with his family. Well, in any case, that summer, I don't know what the beef was about, but he got into one of these beefs. And typically, whenever there was a shooting, it had to do with either women, money, or drugs, or all three, or some combination of those. And so I don't know what he did, but I know that one day, sitting on a park bench, a masked gunman came up and basically shot him a couple times right in the head and killed him. So, this is the early 90s in Charlestown, a lot of drug dealing going on, people killing each other. And I was hanging with some people who I knew them since I was young, right? So people are like, oh, how could you hang around with? And I'm like, well, I've known them since first grade, right? And so in any case, some of the friends, the gang that we hung around with, and by gang, I mean a bunch of kids, and we weren't, blood gang or any Bloods and Crips, any of that kind of gang. But in any case, the group we hung around with, at least 2 or 3 of our close friends were in prison. A couple others were in trouble. Not a lot of people were working. There was just a lot of trouble going on. Let's put it that way. So that was year 2. So year 2, academic suspension. So far, 2 years in, I've got a 0.05 GPA and a dead friend. So now we're going to year 3. So year 3, so my parents make a deal with me. They say, look, if you want to go back to college, you pay for it yourself. However, we will pay for, not pay for, but you don't have to pay room and board, right? So the plan was that I would go there, I would live on campus, and I essentially would pay my own way. So year 3 went pretty well. The only drawback to year 3 was I now had to make up all these courses that I flunked, because once they're on your transcript, the only way to get them off your transcript is to take them over again. So here I am taking some more of these economics courses and whatnot. And I really got interested in psychology. I had to take a psychology course. So I took a couple of those psychology courses. I was living on campus. I had a roommate he was a great kid, but he was a gambler. And I didn't know much about gambling. Early on in my life, I was like, I don't know how to pick these games and whatnot. And so anyway, he had people knocking on our door, calling my phone, and looking for him all the time. And it was just, it turned out to be a bad situation. But anyway, year 3 wasn't too bad. I got some of those courses done, took a few other courses. So year 3, I'm starting to make some progress. And now year 4. So we get into year 4, and I decide I'm going to commute. I'm not going to live on campus. Even when I was living on campus, I came home every weekend anyway, so I might as well have lived at home. So this is when my parents were like, no room and board, but you have to pay your own. So this is when I got a job as a janitor at the hospital, at Mass General Hospital. Wasn't that bad. I worked in a lab in Charlestown and basically had to sweep the floor, mop the floor, empty the trash cans. It wasn't really that bad. So at this time, I'm commuting back and forth, right? I'm driving back and forth, and I'm working nights at the hospital. So I worked 6 to 10 at the hospital. So at this point, I'm starting to get more interested in psychology courses. And I went to my advisor and I said, I want to change my major to psychology. And he's like, why would you do that? And I'm like, I don't like economics. He's like, no, that's not a good enough answer. I can't sign off on this. So I'm like, all right, screw you. So I go and I take more psych courses. I took intro to psych, child psych, abnormal psych, adult psych, all kinds of courses. And I got A's or B pluses, A minuses, whatever, much better than what I had been. And it was lifting my GPA. So another semester I go back to my advisor. Well, he's on hiatus. There's another advisor, guy with the tweed suit, the patches on the elbows, and he says, why psychology? I'm like, I find it interesting and I'm getting good grades in it. He says, good enough. He signs off on the paper. So now I'm about 5 years in, right? So 5th year, I'm taking psychology courses. I'm working at the hospital during the evenings, doing pretty good. My GPA is coming back up again. So year 5, looks good. Year 6, I forget how deep into the year it was. It was about halfway. So it was in the spring. So I made it through the fall, made it through the winter, in the spring. Working at the hospital still, but now I'm working at the clinic in Charlestown. And I come home one night, so I'm working 6 to 10. I come home 10 o'clock. I walk in the front door and I can hear like water dripping. And it smells like fire in the house. And I'm like, what is going on? So I go in the house, I run upstairs. My mother is in her bedroom reading a book, which is odd. And there's water coming from the 3rd floor, dripping down the stairway. And I run upstairs. My brother's bedroom is completely burnt. The bed is burnt. The walls are burnt. There's water everywhere. I asked my mother what happened. Oh, there was a fire. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Where's George? Oh, he's at the hospital. Okay. So my mother, I think, was in shock. And her way of dealing with that was lay in bed and read a book. Anyway, I start calling the hospitals and they're like, yeah, we have him here at, whatever hospital in Boston. And, so I don't think that night, I think the next day I went in to see him and he had smoke inhalation and this, that, and the other thing. And then they call a family meeting. And in the family meeting, the doctors are talking about lesions on his brain and whatnot. And we're like, what is that? They're like, well, anyway, it was some odd thing. And the guy says, well, this is common with people with AIDS. And we're like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, you didn't know that he's got HIV and he's got AIDS and it's progressing, and absolutely no clue. So complete shock. Anyway, so dealing with that, still commuting back and forth to school, and then my brother passed away. Well, during that week, I had an exam somewhere. I forget which class it was. I had an exam, missed the exam because of all the crap going on. Got back to school and went and talked to the professor and said, hey, can I make up the exam? She said, no, you weren't here. You can't make it up. Too bad. And I said, hey, look, my brother just died. She's like, you know what? I'm sorry to hear that. That's not my problem. You weren't here for the test, so you get a 0 on the test. Now, not only did this piss me off, but I had been doing really good in my grades. And I forget what comes first, president's list or the dean's list. But dean's list, I think, was if you get a 3.5 or 3.2 or something. I did that 2 semesters in a row. If you get it a third one, you get president's list. Missing this test kept me off that list. And so I wasn't too happy about that. I don't believe she understood the impact that had and wouldn't allow me to take the test. Anyway, so then so by this time I'm up to year 7, still working at the hospital. I'm in a different job now, also doing an internship at another place for the state of Massachusetts. And I remember so there was a whole lot of just, all right, get through this class, get through this week, get through this day, just because it's sort of like if you swim halfway to an island, you might as well keep going because you can't go back at that point, right? So I had reached the point of no return or diminishing return or one of those. And so I was like, all right, let me just keep on keeping on. I was now a psychology major. I had all these economics courses, so I had a minor in economics. And I remember I finished up, and I remember I took my last final exam. And I went and I sat in my car, which was a Dodge Dart, and I just let out this like loud primordial, is that the word? Primal scream, just not believing that it was finally over. So once again, this is not a recipe for success. I mean, things have worked out, but I hope that someone finds in this story a grain of something that can help them push through and get to a goal that's important to them. So anyway, I did eventually end up with a bachelor's degree in organizational psychology and a minor in economics, and then ended up going on to also get a master's degree in education and an MBA. So anyway, I hope this story helps someone. Peace.